Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I am your host. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I deeply appreciate it. The UFC had a week off a little bit ago, so nice to get back a little bit into the swing. I'm sure I'm gonna be a little bit burned out in the near future for anyone who might just like, oh no, he's so perky. Enjoying a little bit of the swing, but the grind in MMA is real. It's why it burns down fans, and I got to talk about that in a little bit, but we'll get to it because it kind of relates to what happened. But anyway, on the agenda we have for today a review of UFC on ESPN 66. That was a pretty good show for a free show. Not going to complain too much. I'll have some, but not a lot. Then we will preview UFC on ESPN 67. That is Sandhagen and Figueiredo. Upcoming card. We'll give that a preview. And some news. Mostly a few fights being announced and some stuff related to some of the drama around International Fight Week that I talked a little bit about last time. So that's what we got. Any way you can interact with the product is always appreciated, of course. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review. You all know the drill there. Okay. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this, shall we? UFC on ESPN 66. How did we do? We did pretty well, actually. 12 and 2, I think. Didn't have that open. There we go. Yeah, 12 and 2. So, what did I get? Man, I don't think there was one underdog win all night, I think. Who was it? Uh, Yeah, Abus. Magomedov was the underdog in that fight with Michel Pereira. He was the only underdog that won. So, how did this go? I switched my pick on Onama and Giga when Giga missed weight. I don't always change. I'm allowed to change my pick when a fighter misses weight. I don't always, but these days I frequently do. Probably 75, 80% of the time. I can't, not 90 because I haven't in the past, but better than 50-50 by a non-trivial margin. I tend to switch when somebody misses weight. And that's just following the odds for the most part, unless I have a real strong feeling about how the fight's going to go. And I didn't. And Giga still turned in a commendable performance there, so in a lot of respects. I mean, you could have scored that for him, and we'll get to it. So that one I switched. Everything else just kind of played out how it played out. So what did I get wrong? Um, Again, I picked Pereira. Oof, we'll get to that fight. The other one, I picked Cameron Simon, and I think he didn't win. I don't know. I'll save some of that for when I get to the actual fight. I don't feel bad about missing either of those. Um, Maybe the Pereira one I maybe should have got right. Wellmaker and Simon I kind of viewed as a bit more of a coin toss, and I came down on a guy I knew a little bit better, but you get it wrong. The odds got that one right. Again, there was only one underdog that won all fight. That's all night rather. That's a bit iffy. So 12 and 2. 128 and 42, one draw. So 128, 42 and 1 on the year so far. I'm okay with that. I'm doing pretty darn good. Doing pretty darn good. So let's get into the fights in particular then. So in your main event, Ian Machado Garry defeats Carlos Prates via unanimous decision, 248-47 and a 49-46. I kept my pick with Garry after rewatching. I mentioned I wanted to look at a couple of things. The big thing for me that stood out on rewatch was movement and general speed. Carlos Prates, I don't mean to say that he's slow. He's not a slow fighter. That would be a mistake to say. But he's slower than Ian Garry, he's slower than Ian Machado Garry. And that's a tough place to be in a lot of respects. Because the movement of Garry is a real problem if you can't get ahead of him. And even if you can get ahead of him, if you're enough slower than him, it just doesn't go your way because you can't capitalize on all the openings you're able to create. So that's why my pick stayed the same. Now, as for the fight, the first 3 rounds, the reaction to this after the fact is something I got to talk about, but let me get through the fight first. So the first 3 rounds, there is no debate about the scoring here. That should be noted. First 3 rounds are very clearly Ian Machado Garry. He moves well. Anytime Prates does get into range, he's kind of having to deal with punches. Not huge combinations, but enough to keep his guard up and keep him from throwing back, and then Garry's out on an angle. He moves well. He punches well from distance. They both show kicks. Nothing too damaging, but Garry's landing the better punches. He completely depresses the output of Prates. And Prates basically, again, there's no controversy on the scoring here. Round 4, things shift a little bit. I gave 4 to Prates. 2 of the judges did. You could give it to Garry. It was a very close round. But 4 is where Garry starts slowing a little bit. Look, Shavkat didn't make him move as much as he had to move here against Prates. He also didn't wind up... there was just a lot... I'm not saying that the fight with Shavkat was like less physically taxing, but there's different kinds of physical taxation that you have to deal with. The fight with Shavkat was not... how do I say this? It's not that there was no movement from Garry. It's that in that fight there were longer stretches of static strength, and that actually lets your legs recover a little bit. And so Garry didn't quite have problems down the stretch the same way he did here when he had to constantly be moving. He had to fend off takedowns from Shavkat, and against Prates he had to initiate them. And that's a whole other ballgame on your cardio. It's a whole other ballgame on your energy when you're the one trying to force that stuff. So it got to him a little bit down the stretch. Again, you could still give him the 4th. I didn't, but you could, and I don't think it's wrong. The 5th is where things kind of start... The 4th is where things start going sideways for Garry, even if you think he won the round. That is the point at which things start going downhill for him a little bit. The punches from Prates start landing a little bit better. Garry's footwork isn't quite what it used to be. And he starts bleeding by the end of it. He gets cut up a little bit. Not huge. Mostly from the nose, one under the right, like on the right cheek. Nothing huge, but it's there. 5th round, he is clearly, and I don't mean this negatively, he's doing what he had been doing. When I say there's a fine line to appropriately icing a fight. Because if you come out for the 5th round after you've won 3 of the previous 4 clearly, and he had, if you spend that last round doing nothing but defense, you risk the other guy really coming to life. You also don't want to do anything stupid. Usually, again, this is the advice you get from your coach. They tell you keep doing what you're doing because that's what they want you to do. What you've been doing is working. Keep doing that. Don't get out over your skis, but don't go so off the game plan and off of what's working that your opponent winds up with opportunities to try and take it from you. It's a fine line. And so when I say Garry started looking to kind of ice that last round, I don't mean that he did nothing but run away. I don't mean that he did nothing but, try desperately to avoid Prates. He did a lot of what he had been doing. It's a lot of movement, a lot of countering it, or striking at distance. It's a lot of selective engagement, and it's a lower output. That's what he'd been doing. He shifted a little bit in terms of sort of his mentality, which is not the worst thing in the world. But By this point, Prates knows he needs a finish, and he becomes a bit more just dogged in his pursuit of the fight. The previous rounds, a lot of it is Prates going forward, but not all of it. Garry would disrupt him a little bit with some forward motion, or anytime he kind of like fired a blitz, he wouldn't just blitz and then reset. He'd actually spend a bit of time going forward because Prates off the back foot is not. I'm not saying it's an easy fight. He's not at all an easy fight, but on the back foot, Prates is not the same fighter that he is on the front foot. So Garry would spend time taking that away from him in that respect. And it's good strategy. It really is. But the fifth round is almost all Prates coming forward, like noticeably so. And he starts landing, and he actually hurts Garry, and he kind of gets on top of him near the end. They're both a little bit fatigued by the end of this, and this is not the highest output fight you'll ever see, but that doesn't mean it's not energy taxing. There's a lot of ways to expend energy when you're fighting. It's not all of them are throwing strikes. Not even all of them are grappling. There's a lot that goes into that. And look, Garry had gone 5 rounds once before. I don't think Prates had. Not in the UFC, certainly. Let me take a quick look at his earlier career. No. He'd been scheduled for 5 at least once, but didn't go anywhere near it. He's been 3, a couple of times? And there's a few times he's gone into the 3rd. But he'd never been out of the 3rd. Yeah, ever. So he gets into a little bit of unknown territory. He ends the fight, again, looking pretty strong, actually. He finally starts figuring some things out, it looks like. Or he's kind of worn down some of Garry's defense and movement enough that he's able to get some effective offense going. Some people are criticizing him for not being able to get a finish. There was an odd decision that he made. I will grant you the following. Garry kept shooting this like high crotch single, which is a weird thing to try and shoot. Normally you shoot, you grab the single, then you come up on the high crotch. You don't reach for it and grab there, because he would try to grab that and then go to like running the pipe very quickly. The problem is Prates was ready for that and had a takedown counter built in. As soon as they start going down, he kind of wraps the head with one arm and then with the other reaches for the legs, like going for a cradle almost. And it's a big threat to push you over and get on top. And the brief moments of time in the 5th round when Prates got on top, man, he had some decent ground and pound going. So Garry winds up, look, he's a little bit fatigued. He does get hit. The cleanest he gets hit is in the 5th round. Again, he gets tagged in the 4th. But the 5th is where he gets hit enough that like his composure starts to rattle. So the visual of him trying to like crawl away while Prates stands, Prates then goes to the right as they're against the fence, and he doesn't throw a whole lot when there are opportunities for the left hand in particular to start firing in. And then he stands free and then just doesn't throw another strike before the end of the fight. And we're talking like, 10-15 seconds. So looked a little bit weird, and people are kind of dogging on him, like, he was so hurt, why couldn't you finish him? Well, yeah, it wasn't looking good for Garry, but this notion that he was like, oh, he was almost unconscious. No, that I don't think. There's some bad body language. I get where some people are coming from with that, but that was not nearly stopped. Things are going bad, and I'm not saying a stoppage couldn't develop, but pretending that, like, yes, he's right there, it was so close, no. I don't think the decision he made, a couple of those decisions he made were the best in terms of getting towards a stoppage, given the circumstances. But I don't think he was, like, super close. Not super close. Like, you could see the path to him getting a finish, but it wasn't, like, right there and he fumbled it badly. I disagree with the decision he made, but that's another thing. So it's a weird thing to have, people coming out of this going, boy, Ian Garry sucks. Like, he didn't just cleanly win the first 3 rounds. There's no dispute here. If he had barely gotten out of there, like a disputed decision, this wasn't, or survived by the skin of his teeth, that seems an exaggeration to me. Survived a bad spot. Survived a pretty bad spot. I can't get quite to like really bad, but it was pretty bad. It was not looking good. But it wasn't like a hair's breadth away from being finished either. It was not good, but not like that close to the end. He fought fairly intelligently when he did get in trouble. That's actually a positive sign for him. Uh, so people are starting to dog on him for that, and like he clearly won 3 rounds, and he could have won. You could give him 4. I'm not gonna dogpile him for having a tough 5th round against a tough opponent after having 3 rounds that are just very, 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 very good. I can't quite do it. Now, for what it is worth, commentary relayed a story from their fighter meeting with him when he said, "So, what round do you want me to finish the fight in?" And he was talking with Paul Felder, and Felder said, "Well, I really like the fight, so can we at least get 10 minutes?" And like, "Yeah, sure, I'll finish him in the third." Like, when you're saying crap like that, and then you end the 5th round like you do, that's that's incongruous. Is the long and the short of that. The actual skill on display from Ian Garry, very good. A lot very good here. He's good about depressing your offensive output. And fighters who can do that are a real problem for people. This is what Volkanovski does. I mean, he did it to Max Holloway 3 times. He actually kind of did it to Makhachev in their first fight. If you look at Makhachev's offensive output, it's not quite what it is in other fights. Volk just did a good job of neutralizing a lot of that. John Jones, one of the best. He turned into this. If you watch his earlier career, it wasn't quite this way, but he turned into one of the best fighters in the world at making sure anything you try to do just doesn't work, doesn't land, doesn't do anything. And then he just kind of has his way with you from there. Ian Garry does a good job of taking very offensively minded fighters and slowing their output to a crawl or to a fraction of what it normally is. It's a skill, it's a real skill, and it's not something that should be diminished. That said, his grappling game is actually okay. His finishing technique leaves something to be desired, both finishing takedowns and finishing like submission holds. His striking has pop and is pretty accurate, but there's something about the way that he chooses to engage that almost seems to like minimize his own offensive potency. Look, he ran through a bunch of guys on the regional scene. Fair play to you. In the UFC, he has 3 finishes. And I don't mean to downplay this. He got a decent one in his debut, had 2 decisions, beat Song Kanan via stoppage. He had a rough first round against Song, though. Then he TKOs Daniel Rodriguez, and that's good. And look, he takes a step up in class after that. He's Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, Michael Page, Shavkat Rakhmonov, now Carlos Prates. Look, he is certainly not... I'm not bagging on the guy for not being able to stop some of those people. Like, Neil Magny's hard to stop. Not impossible, but hard. Michael Page, hard to stop. Shavkat, undefeated. Like, these are very, very tough guys he's fighting. But think about some of those fights. First of all, the Jeff Neal fight was a split decision. I think I scored that for Garry. I actually scored the fight with Page for Page. A lot of Garry's fighting in that I was not terribly impressed with. But point being, like, how close did he get to finishing any of those people? He got close with a choke attempt on Shavkat in the 5th round of their fight. Credit to that. Real thing. And he had a couple of choke attempts on Page that, you know, were developed enough that a better finisher of the choke would have got him out of there. But again, there's just something about, I think between the tape on him and people starting to get a feel for what he does offensively, they haven't cracked his defense reliably. It's kind of the big thing that is keeping, that's going to hold people at bay for a while, is they haven't cracked his defensive code. But a chunk of his offense seems to be people are figuring it out. Not to the point where he's not dangerous. Please don't misunderstand me there. But they've kind of got a little bit of a handle on his offense, it feels like. And that means he's going to be in a lot more fights like this, where what he does is going to be good enough to win rounds. And he's certainly he's got power in his strikes, and I'm not trying to downplay that in any way his skill. This is sort of just how do I think the future is going to look for him. I think he's going to be in a lot more fights like this, where he's going to win rounds. But his style breaks down a little bit over time. This is something he can fix. To be clear, this is just a right now problem. But he needs to get a little bit better at maintaining over the full 25 minutes. When you fight the way he does, that's not easy. Especially for a guy his size. He's a pretty big welterweight. So, for someone like Dominic Cruz or Alexandre Pantoja, or the lighter guys, fighting that kind of style for 25 minutes is a little bit easier than just moving around less mass. He doesn't quite have that luxury. So he needs to find ways to minimize the drop-off that he has as the fight goes on. Because it's not a lot. Wasn't a lot here. It was noticeable, but it wasn't like he didn't fall apart. It just degraded enough for openings to become present. That's going to be a bigger deal against other fighters, especially now that it looks to be a bit more of a consistent problem. So there's that. So, people, again, they're a little bit down on him. Me, not quite as much as others, but he should take this as a fairly serious learning experience on a couple of parts of his game. And if he doesn't correct some of these issues, it's going to cost him in a big way. Not right away, but inevitably and without proper adjustments sooner rather than later. As for Prates, again, people were kind of dogging on him for, you couldn't get a finish. The finish was not as close as you all thought it was, for a lot of the people saying that. There's also some guy on Twitter doing TKO buying the UFC has ruined it. Ruined. Prates had a chance to finish, and he didn't because there was so much money bet on it behind the scenes to go the distance that clearly he was told it has to go all 5. And when he was appropriately called out for his stupidity, his response was, prove that it's not true. Like, buddy, you don't have to prove a negative. You're making a positive assertion. You have to prove it. Oh, you have no evidence? Then you have no claim. Ugh, morons. Spade of MMA fandom. Morons. I'm not saying fight fixing has never happened in MMA. I'm saying if you think that's what happened here, you're out of touch with reality. So Prates got to go 5 rounds. He fell apart's the wrong word. He degraded a bit down the stretch too, let's be clear about that. But held up fairly well, all things considered. For his first 5-round fight, like fight that actually goes 5, he did pretty darn good. He still has power. The things he needs to address. His cage cutting could use work. Some of this was exacerbated by Ian Garry being very good about moving around. but needs to work on that. If there's stuff he could do to improve his foot speed, and there are things you can do, but it's kind of a... On the one hand, speed is one of those things that you can train it, you can get better at it. Please don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. But there is a natural inclination towards some of these athletic attributes that you need to just have instead of trying to build from a lower position. I'm sure he could get faster of foot, but some guys are just naturally a little bit slower. The flip side is, if he might get faster of foot, but part of the reason he's a little bit slower on his feet is that it lets him generate more power. If he does not think the trade-off there is worth it, if he'd rather keep his power and just understand that there's some guys who it's going to take me a little bit longer to catch up to, that's a decision. And once again, there's positives and negatives to that choice. There's not a lot of guys in that division who move like Ian Garry. He moves real well. There are a few, and there's people who are going to look at what he did here and maybe take some lessons about how to approach fighting Prates. But it might be that he just decides, like, this is one of those things that I'm not willing to make the trade-off where I lose a lot of my punching power and some of my devastation in favor of being really light on my feet. I still think he would benefit from finding ways to get a little quicker, but that's one of those things you also only wind up learning when you're finally confronted with somebody who makes you realize that about yourself. And I think he probably realized that after this fight. We'll see what he does next. So moving forward, to make the point, a lot of people a little bit down on both guys for different reasons. I'm not. I don't think this was a star-making performance for either guy. Garry doing I'm the backup for the main event at Montreal, which the UFC seemed to confirm. We'll see about that. And I want the next title shot. Yeah, that's unlikely. Not impossible. Unlikely. Shavkat's still ahead of him. We still don't know how Jack Della Maddalena and Belal Muhammad is going to play out. If Belal loses in weird fashion, there might be an immediate rematch. I think that's very unlikely, given that the UFC doesn't seem to care all that much for Belal. But if he doesn't get an immediate rematch, Islam Makhachev has made noise about coming up if Belal loses. Garry is going to be at the back of all of those lines. He might be preferable to a Belal and JDM rematch, depending on what controversy might warrant an immediate rematch. But that's about it. He's behind Shavkat. He's behind Makhachev. Shavkat might be behind Makhachev, if we're being honest. But he is in a good position. He'll probably have to have one more win. But we've also got... I don't want to talk about this yet. Let me talk about it now. I'll take it off the list for later stuff. We did get the main event for the UFC in Atlanta later in July. June or July. Quick check. I think it's July. No, June. Sorry, June 14th. There we go. Yeah, they're in Atlanta. That is main evented by Kamaru Usman and Joaquin Buckley. Usman's been out of action since the loss to Khamzat Chimaev. That was October of 23, so he's been out for a bit. I assume his knees have not gotten better. Buckley's been making noise about wanting to fight with Garry. If he beats Kamaru Usman, I think it's borderline inevitable. They would basically be on the collision course there, and Buckley's made enough noise about it. seems reasonable. That is pursuant to Buckley winning. We'll see how that goes. I actually do kind of favor him. All respect to Kamaru Usman, second best welterweight of all time, but at his age, with his histories, I think his time has passed. Anyway, so that seems to be what's next. Prates will still be a real problem for the division. He's probably going to go back. I think they should remake. He was supposed to fight somebody else. He was supposed to fight. Was he supposed to fight Jeff Neal? Yeah, he was supposed to fight Jeff Neal a couple of weeks ago. That fell apart because of Neal. This got made instead. I would see if they could rebook Jeff Neal and Carlos Prates. That's a good fight on its own terms as well. So anyway, that was your main event. I'm not going to say it's all downhill from here. That would be a bit of an exaggeration, but a little bit. So, co-main event, Zhang Mingyang defeats Anthony Smith via TKO, punches and elbows, 4:03 of the first. Kind of how we expected this to go. Anthony Smith is just done. He's been done for a while. I don't have a lot to say about the fight. Smith tried to make a go of it. Smith, I think he said it himself, like, the me of 5 years ago would have won this fight. I completely agree with that, by the way. But, he's just kind of done. Once the elbows started flying, he threw some good ones of his own, but he just, he doesn't have it anymore. And look, after all the fights and all the years and whatnot, to be understood and expected. Here's my thing about this, because they gave him a big, video retirement package, and he got all emotional about it, and, I'm not going to blame the guy for that. But he got this big treatment like this is a legend. Guys, and some people were reacting like, oh, it is, guys. I have a lot of respect for Anthony Smith's career. He's a very good analyst on the desk for the broadcast. Again, full respect to his career. The fact that he went to the UFC, got cut, fought his way back, made a good go of it, wound up moving up in weight, and did get to a title fight, granted in a terrible division, and then had basically nothing to offer Jon Jones in any meaningful capacity. The only thing people remember about that fight is that he could have won the belt on a DQ, and he didn't, because he chose not to. And that is some, movie stuff that you just don't see in real life, and he did it, so respect. But he's not, a legend. He's not a Hall of Famer. He's not... For a guy who's been in the UFC as long as he has, could you name me 5 Anthony Smith fights? I could maybe get there because they put a few of them in the highlight package, so they're fresh in my mind. But absent that, I don't think I could. And people were mentioning, I'm not trying to dog on the guy getting a decent send-off. But this tends to happen more to people that the UFC and the broadcast than have necessarily achieved the highest of stature. Sometimes those two things overlap, but not always. I mean, I have to ask this question this way because I do. Where was this for Stipe? Your most accomplished heavyweight champion in promotional history is Stipe Miocic. We all knew he was retiring after that Jon Jones fight. That was not some big surprise to anyone. And what did you give that guy? Nothing. A tweet. I mean, look, you give Robbie Lawler a big package. Former champion. Fair enough. You couldn't do that for the most successful heavyweight champion you've ever had? But you'll do it for God, I hate to say this because it carries such a negative connotation that I'm not meaning here. I mean this as a compliment. You'll do that for a career journeyman? I mean, again, it's just kind of who they like rather than who has earned it in some kind of meritocratic sense. Those 2 points can overlap. Let me stress that again. Can overlap, but it's not a given. I mean, Dominic Cruz's retirement was supposed to be in front of a big crowd, and instead, that fell apart due to injury. And fair play to him, man. If he was done, he was done. But then they give him the retirement video package in the Apex in front of a handful of drunken idiots. Like, ugh. And the fan base doesn't understand. The modern fan base doesn't understand the actual history. I've been on this kick for a while. The UFC has done a very poor job of integrating and shepherding the history of this sport. And the fans have done a poor job of explaining it and showing it and sharing it with the new generation of fans. Partially because a lot of the fans who were there for the old legendary stuff aren't here anymore. So not to phrase it in the language of an internet meme, but the deep knowledge is being lost here, people. Because the UFC doesn't care about it. The UFC cares about producing enough slop to meet their contractually mandated minimums. And the fan base that they have at the moment seems okay with that. And I am not here to police how you enjoy anything. Let me tell you what that does mean, though. It means you don't get an opinion about stuff like this. If you're not willing to find old MMA fans, look, even people who are lapsed and have left, if you find them and ask them about their favorite fights, you may never get them to watch anything contemporary. They will tell you the good fights. Because there were some bad ones back then too, but they will tell you the good ones. And you can maybe get them to talk about it. You can still find this knowledge if you care about it, but most of them don't. And if you choose not to, okay. I am not judging you for this. I am not looking down upon you. I am saying, however, very, very clearly, don't try to quote the old magic to me, which I was there when it was written. There's people that I don't get to quote old stuff to because they were there when I wasn't. I've been here for a while. There are people who've been here longer than me. But I have been watching this sport for 20 years. Little more than. Covering it for a big chunk of that. So, my roots go pretty deep. And I know people with deeper roots than me. God bless them. And if a lot of us who've been here for a while look at this and go, man, respect to Anthony Smith, but like, are we pretending this guy's going in the Hall of Fame or something? No. No. He's just been there for a bit, and people like him, and as I mentioned, very good analyst on the desk for ESPN. Very good. Had a very commendable career, a later career renaissance that, frankly, most of us didn't see coming. God bless. I hope he enjoys the next phase of his life, sincerely from the bottom of my heart. But if your only ability to look at, analyze, and understand this sport is agreeing with the UFC's presentation that borders on propaganda and is fickle, you don't actually have an opinion. You're a parrot. You're carrying water for the promoter. And that's no. Once again, just no. Please do not be that guy. And you don't have to watch every event and watch every fight to have an informed opinion. You really don't. I do because I'm paid for it. But find older fans and figure out some of this other stuff, man. Because if all you have is what's right now that you're half watch on your second screen, you don't get to have an opinion on some of this stuff because you do not know enough. And I hate to pull that card. I very rarely do. But The erosion of the MMA fan base every 3 to 5 years, over and over and over and over again, is really becoming detrimental to everything about this sport. Look, we're not that far away from the break point for the people who came in during the pandemic. Because the UFC was the only thing going for a little bit of time there. So a lot of people found them when they were frustrated by the government and desperate for entertainment and going stir crazy because lockdowns. Here's the UFC. Kind of figured out a way to do this. We're coming up on the 5-year break point for those people. Next year or two. It's going to be like the 4th generation of MMA fans I've seen come and go. And I don't know what it's going to look like when... Because you don't lose all of them. I say that like, the whole thing falls apart. You lose about... 50 to 75%? I know that's a big chunk. That's some wide variance there. I get it. But you lose about 50 to 75% of the audience that you gained over that 5-year period-ish. That may hold a little bit better with a bunch of people just doing second screen half viewing. But it's still going to hit. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't think it's a coincidence that the UFC's television deals tend to expire on about that cycle. I really don't. You get to about the high point of that, therefore, like the year or so before. So you get to the high point of that about the year they start negotiating. And then the first year or so with the new deal tends to be rebuilding. That's kind of how it was with ESPN. That's kind of how it was with Fox. Not identical, but kind of. Yeah. So, sorry. Got on a fun tangent there. Next up, David Onama defeats Giga Chikadze via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Could have given this to Giga. Giga missed weight. Never great. Had a good first round. Onama's grappling comes into play a little bit more in the second. Third's a little bit back and forth. They both are able to land punches on occasion, but the issue in the third was Onama's ground and pound wasn't super compelling. Part of the reason I think he got the decision was Giga didn't land enough really differentiating level strikes on the feet. So even though I think he got a little bit the better of the striking, which I do think he did, he just, at least I do off of memory, he didn't do enough to overcome being taken down and some of the ground and pound that Onama was able to land and the longer period of control from good position. For whatever that's worth. So, there was that. Middleweight, oh god, this fight sucked. Abus Magomedov defeats Michel Pereira via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. I can't say a single thing about this fight. Michel Pereira looks like something about that loss to Hernandez damaged him. Fight before this, he lost to Anthony Hernandez, and there's no shame in losing to Anthony Hernandez. He's very good. But he may have taken an inadvisable amount of damage over the course of that fight because he looked awful. And Magomedov had an okay first round, not great, and then just kind of did a little bit enough. I actually gave Pereira, I think, the second. This is terrible. This is a terrible fight. I don't know why Dana White was, of all the terrible fights he's defended over the years, I have no earthly idea why this one he decided to stand up and go, no, I don't think it was that bad. This fight sucked out loud. And yeah, the fans were a little bit spoiled by some of the earlier fights being really good. That's true. Under any circumstances, this was a terrible fight. There have been worse, but this was terrible. They both gassed out in the halfway through the second, not unusual for either man. But they gassed out doing nothing. I don't know what in the world was up here. Terrible fight. Cut both guys. Terrible. This is on my list for worst fights of the year. We'll see if it stays there or not, but awful. Welterweight, this was your fight of the night, actually. Randy Brown knocks out Nicholas Dalby, 139 of the second. Good fight. Good fight. Brown able to stay at range early. Got a nice long jab, good long kicking game. Dalby starts getting more into boxing range a little bit as the fight goes on. Both men land punches, both get hurt. Nice little finishing sequence. Beautiful right hook in the pocket from Randy Brown to knock out Dalby. Fight of the night. There were a couple you could have gone. The other one you could have gone here. You could have gone Schnell and Flick. I don't think that would have been out of line. Who's the other one? I couldn't quite get there with Gutierrez and Castaneda. That was a fine fight, though. No, can't quite get to Blackshear and all the time. Schnell and Flick was your other like serious, semi-serious contender for that belt, for that title, and no issues with Brown and Dalby getting it. Really good stuff from both guys. Randy Brown after the fight said, I'd like to fight a ranked guy. Yeah, that seems fair. That seems very fair. So that was good. Middleweight next, Ikram Alaskarov defeats Andre Muniz via TKO, 4:54 of the first. Muniz just constantly getting backed up to the fence. Eventually that's going to go real bad for you, and eventually it did. Nice rebound for Alaskarov after he fell short against Robert Whittaker. I'm not going to hold that against him. Robert Whittaker's great, so. At this point in his career, falling short against one of the all-time greats at middleweight, and Whittaker absolutely belongs in that discussion. He's not at the top. It's probably still, Silva, Izzy. You could put Bobby Knuckles third. I think that's fair. If we're just talking division. He's third or fourth. You could argue those two places. And we'll see how the future goes. That might change, but losing to that guy, just not gonna bury you over it. So he got a nice bounce back win here. On the prelims, Matt Schnell defeated Jimmy Flick via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Pretty good first round for Flick. He struggled a bit on the feet, but once he was able to force the grappling, got a lot of time on top. Second round, Schnell did a better job of sweeping whenever they'd get down. Just a fun little flyweight fight. At lightweight, Evan Elder defeated Gage Young via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. This was fine enough mid-level MMA. Chris Gutierrez defeated John Castaneda via split decision, 29-28. Could have gone either way. I scored this for Gutierrez. But his output is a problem. He just doesn't. He can be pressured to a point where he doesn't quite throw enough. And a lot of his offense is kick-based, so if you kind of neutralize that, he struggles. Not a bad little fight, but nothing special. Damon Blackshear defeated Alatong Hele via unanimous decision, 2:30-27 and a 29-28. I disagree with giving Blackshear the second, actually. I thought a lot of his offense dwindled in that round, and Alatong Hele did some pretty good work. But 1 and 3 to Blackshear, no problems. Malcolm Wellmaker knocked out Cameron Simon, 159 of the first. I wonder if Simon wouldn't be better served to, because he's still very young. He's still in his 20s? Yeah, he's 24. He might be legitimately better served by going to a good regional level show for a couple of years and then coming back. He needs skill development, and the UFC is a bad place to try and develop your skills. It's not like he fought badly here, but I mean, he actually landed a good punch on Wellmaker before Wellmaker's landed on him. Wellmaker just hit harder. And for as long as it lasted, again, not awful. Jacqueline Amarim defeated Poliana Viana via rear naked choke, 149 in the second. This was all Amarim. She's very one-dimensional in that her striking is not that great, but her grappling is legitimate world champion Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu level. She wants to fight ranked opposition next. Probably about time. Featherweight Timmy Kwamba defeated Roberto Romero via TKO, flying knee, among other things. 355 for the second. This was a good little fight. Good little fight for both guys. And kicking everything off, Jocelyn Edwards TKO'd Chelsea Chandler, 231 of the first. Chelsea Chandler was somehow ranked coming into this, despite only being 2-2 in the UFC. I think 1-3 in the division and had missed weight twice. But women's bantamweight is such an absolute dumpster fire that still means she was ranked. Ugh, what are you going to do? Right, that was it. That was the whole card. Again, 14 fights. That's always a bit much for me. This didn't wrap until well after 11, and it started at my time. It started at 4. So we were well over 6 hours for this. We were a little over 7, I think, when it was all said and done. Yeah, that's just a lot of time. It's a lot of time, man. Your bonuses, already mentioned Fight of the Night, Randy Brown, Nicholas Dalby, big thumbs up. Performances of the night went to Zhang Mingyang and Malcolm Wellmaker. I would not have given Zhang one. I would have given that to, if you didn't want to double up Randy Brown, and I understand why you don't, I would have given that to Kwamba over Zhang. Personally, but some of that is just me. Anyway, full report, MMAZona411mania.com. Y'all know where you can find that. Go give it a listen. Give it a read. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the heck out of you. Hope you all know that. All right. That took a little longer than I anticipated, but we're doing okay for a preview review show, aren't we? Okay, UFC on ESPN 67. They will be in Des Moines, Iowa. Sorry, that is the wrong webpage. Okay. I will handle... sorry, you get to listen to me handle this. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so as I mentioned, they're in Des Moines, Iowa, and main event. We have a really good fight for the main event. At bantamweight, Cory Sandhagen and former flyweight champion Deiveson Figueiredo. Yes, please. This is a good fight. I'm very much looking forward to this. Here you have a guy with a lot of marauding power in Deiveson Figueiredo, who kind of reinvented himself at bantamweight as a guy who was able to lean more on his grappling. Because he has good grappling. He couldn't quite lean on it at flyweight because his gas tank wasn't there from the weight cut. He can lean on it at bantamweight, and he has given guys fits with that. I mean, Figueiredo at bantamweight, he's got one loss. Yeah, he's coming off the loss to Piotr Jan, but was 3 in a row in the division before that with wins over Rob Font, Cody Garbrandt, and Marlon Vera. Those are not... Dude, when your divisional debut is against Rob Font and you win, that's a heck of a thing. Now, on the other hand, we've got Sandhagen, who's been this close to a title shot a handful of times, including fighting for the interim belt once. Look, I thought he beat TJ Dillashaw. I don't agree with scoring that fight for TJ. The loss to Jan was legit. That was a really good fight. He rebounds with 3 in a row. The Marlon Vera fight shouldn't have been split. And most recently, though, lost pretty clearly a 5-round decision to Umar Nurmagomedov. So now he's trying to get back, trying to maintain. Figueiredo is looking to try and do something a little bit crazy at his age and go for a weight class title, again, up a rank. This is a good fight. You've got speed, technique, precision in Cory Sandhagen against marauding power, a little bit more wild from Deiveson Figueiredo. Both men can grapple. I think Figueiredo does a bit more of the control game, whereas Sandhagen likes to play speed chess on the ground, as an analogy. I'm very much looking forward to this. The odds are pretty heavily with Sandhagen. I wouldn't be that comfortable with them as, I mean, we're talking like, what, minus 400? Minus 5 in some places. Sheesh. I wouldn't be comfortable with that, personally. But I have no problem favoring Sandhagen. He's got some real physical advantages here. Look, Figueiredo's 5'5" with 68 inches of reach. Sandhagen's 5'11", only an inch and a half of reach advantage, though. Like, Sandhagen's fought better guys in the weight class. That's very true. If Figueiredo can't corner him, he's going to really struggle. And there's some of this that I expect a higher output, but there's some of this that is somewhat reminiscent of how Prates had to try and corral Garry, but Sandhagen is much more durable with his game. So I have no problem going Sandhagen. I wouldn't be comfortable at 5-1 in his favor. Just throwing that out there, but I have no problem picking him. Middleweight's up next. Reinier de Ridder and Bo Nickel. Kind of interested in this one. Bo Nickel had a non-great fight against Paul Craig his last time out. He's going to try and keep this from going to the ground. And I don't know that de Ridder can force him to grapple. If he can, de Ridder's the best. Look, Bo Nickel's the superior wrestler, but de Ridder has really good grappling. He's gone 2-0 in the UFC. Both finishes. In fact, he got through Kevin Holland pretty quickly. The odds are with Nickel at a rate about 3-1, so minus 310, give or take. I expect that to close a little bit, but I don't think that's too far off. Minus 250 to minus 270 for Bo Nickel seems about right to me. I just don't know that de Ridder can force him to play his game. And I don't know that de Ridder can beat Nickel fighting how Nickel wants to fight. I'm going to go with Nickel. Let me asterisk this. There's a couple of things I want to see about them. I'm going to do a little bit of rewatching, and I need to see those two next to each other. So I'll asterisk that one real fast. Welterweight next, Santiago Ponzinibbio and Daniel Rodriguez. This is a fine fight. Ponzinibbio, 38. Coming off a win over Carlston Harris that he struggled a bit before he struggled early but rallied late, which is kind of the story of his career at this point in time. 2-4 in his last 6. A couple of those split decisions. Actually, 3 of those are split decisions. I think he lost all of those, though. What was the closest of them? Salikov was decently close. I think he lost the Pereira fight. I was pretty sure he lost the Neal fight, too, but there were a few of those I could understand it being split, even if I disagreed. You know, even if I didn't feel it was all that close, but, you know. Daniel Rodriguez, on the other hand, also 38. Coming off a win over Alex Morono, that should not have been split. He'd lost 3 in a row before that. Neil Magny, he fought okay in that before he got caught late. And then Ian Garry and Kelvin Gastelum. The Gastelum fight was a short notice thing. Torn on this one. A few years ago, I would have picked Ponzinibbio without too much agitation, but at this point, the story of his career, again, at this point, seems to be just struggles early and then really kind of dogs it out late, and that's not sustainable. Odds are real close. Southpaw Rodriguez. Let me go with Rodriguez. I'm not very confident in that, but I'm not very confident in either of these guys. Bantamweight, Montel Jackson and Daniel Marcos. Jackson has been pretty good in the UFC lately, 5 in a row. Only name you, well, let's see. Back-to-back knockouts of Ronnie Yahya and Damon Blackshear is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, really does seem to kind of found his footing recently, which is a positive. He's fighting a guy, though, who's really good. Daniel Marcos, undefeated, 17-0, won no contest. Coming off a split decision win over Adrian Yanez. The split on that was a little bit weird. Here we have two guys who I think are definitely going to be future play. Marcos is 32. Jackson's what, 33? Yeah. So two guys with another couple of years or so to really make good. But definitely on the ascendancy, both of them. Jackson is the favorite. How do I feel about that? I might favor Marcos. Marcos is just kind of hard to drag into the kind of fight that Jackson likes. Okay, I'm going to asterisk this one too. I hate to do that. I should have done some tape study earlier in the week, but not to delve too deeply into a bunch of my personal stuff, but I suffered for the last couple of weeks I've been dealing with what I think is piriformis syndrome, or something very, very similar to it, which is it's basically we have sciatic pain. And that sucks. So my back, my left leg, like Monday, golly, I barely got out of bed. I mean, everything hurt. So, point being, there's a lot of stuff that just I was in enough pain that I just struggled to really get around to doing. So, a few of these I might wind up asterisking where I normally wouldn't, so I apologize. I hope you'll just kind of bear with me as I work through that. It seems to be getting better. Chiropractor helped, and then I found some things I can do, and we'll just see how that goes. It's been improving the last few days. It was, like I said, man, a lot of last week was real bad. Real bad. That would almost be 2 weeks ago from when this is going live, so yeah, just rough. Really rough. Falling apart, man. Coming up on 40. Oh boy. All right, next up, bantamweights, Cameron Smotherman and Sari Saidi. A quick look at the odds on this one first. Odds are with Saidi. Let me see if I agree with that. So Saidi is 11-2. 1-1 in the UFC. Lost his UFC debut via split decision. Won a split decision his next time out. Smotherman, 12-4. That R blends into the M on smaller font. Had a decent UFC debut over Jake Hadley. I think I'm just going to go with the odds on this one. And I already mentioned the odds. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll just go with the odds at the moment. All right. But I admit that's all I'm doing for that one. I don't have some great insight. Lightweight next, Jeremy Stephens, back after some time in BKFC. He's fighting Mason Jones. Stephens is an Iowa boy. So that's kind of what's going on here. His recent UFC run, MMA run, has not been great. So he was booted from the UFC in 21 after a long time without a win. Good grief. Yeah, he hadn't won since he stopped Josh Emmett with those violent elbows in 2018. He got stopped by Aldo, lost to Zabit, had the no contest with Yair Rodriguez, lost to Yair Rodriguez, lost to Calvin Kattar, lost to Mateusz Gamrot, got cut. Lost to Clay Collard in the PFL in 22, beat Miles Price, lost to Natan Schulte, and then went to BKFC. Well, did some boxing in BK and bare knuckle boxing as well. So that's what he's been up to. Most recently in bare knuckle, he beat Eddie Alvarez. That's nothing to sneeze at. But yeah, he got back to the UFC for this event. I don't know. Tell me about Mason Jones. So Jones is back in the UFC. His previous run, he went 1-2 with a no contest. He lost to Mike Davis, had a no contest with Alon Patrick, beat David Onama, and then lost to Ludovic Klein. 4-0 since then. 3 finishes, all through Cage Warriors. Very respectable. I mean, Jeremy Stevens is a little bit past it at this point, and Jones isn't. In fact, real quick, how old is Jones? He's 30. And Stevens is, 30. Yeah, Jones. How big are the odds? Hang on. Oof, okay. I would not be comfortable with that. Odds are like -5 to -600 in favor of Jones. That I'd be sweating that a little bit if I were carrying that. On the prelims, let's see, what do we got? Yana Santos and Miesha Tate. God, who cares? Tate came out of retirement a little bit ago. Beat Marion Renault, then lost twice in a row to Ketlin Vieira and Lauren Murphy. Yeah, flyweight was not the answer for Miesha Tate. She came back up to bantamweight and got a real gimme against Julia Avila in 23. She's been out since then. I don't know. Yana Santos coming off a win over Chelsea Chandler. Had a split decision loss to Carol Hossa before that. That was actually pretty close. I don't know. Miesha Tate's just kind of, again, over the hill. But it's not like Yana Santos is some world beater. Odds like Tate. Am I really going to pick Miesha Tate? Ugh. I don't want to. I don't have to. That layoff. Hang on, how long ago has Santos fought? She hasn't been active either. August of last year. Okay, that's not unreasonable. She did beat Ketlin Vieira, so if we want to play some MMA math. And I don't. I mean, there's other MMA math who could play there. I'm not going to pick Miesha Tate. I'm going to asterisk that one too, because I'm doing this late at night, and I may be wildly out of touch with reality. I can't tell you, when I wind up doing these later at night, the number of times I've woken up the next morning and gone, "What, you did what?" Past me is an idiot. Middleweight next, Ryan Loder and Azamat Bakoev. Let me have a quick look here. I think Bakoev's the favorite, right? Yeah. -3 and change, almost -4 in some places. So Bakoev is 19-3, 7-fight winning streak. Successful UFC debut. He kind of ran over Zach Reese. That is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Loder, 7-1, 5-fight winning streak. Successful UFC debut when he won the Ultimate Fighter over Robert Valentin. I don't care about the Ultimate Fighter, neither should anyone else. In fact, they were trying to do the celebrate 20 years of Tough with Team Sonnen and Team Cormier. Like, nobody cares. Really, nobody cares about the Ultimate Fighter at this point. It's just terrible. Yeah, Bakoev. They're not doing Loader any favors coming off of that win. Bakoev's good. Next up, Marina Rodriguez and Jillian Robertson. Rodriguez 17-5-2, Robertson 15-8. Rodriguez been slipping a bit lately. I mean, she was pretty close to a title shot. Beat Yan Xiaonan, but she's just 1-4 in her last 5. Losses to Amanda Lemos and Virna Jandiroba. She beat Michelle Watterson. Lost a split decision to Jessica Andrade. You could have scored that for her. I don't think I did, but I don't think it was wrong to score it for her. And then a split decision to Yasmin Lucindo. That one I was a little bit easier scoring for Lucindo. Robertson, 3-fight winning streak. For someone with as many fights, she's only 29. Sheesh, I forget how young she is because she's, got a lot of fights and been around for a bit. I still think that Robertson's a fairly hefty favorite. There was a time I would have favored Rodriguez here. I can see why they're favoring Robertson, though. I'll go with the odds. But if they're wide enough, I don't think it would be foolish to wager a little bit of value money on Rodriguez. I don't think the fight is that wide. Bantamweight next, Gaston Bolaños and Kwong Lee. So, take a look at these guys. Bolaños 8-4. Had a bit of a rough, 2-1 in the UFC. Beat Aaron Phillips. Oh, geez. Yeah, that loss to Marcus McGee was pretty rough. McGee did him proper. Coming off a win over Cortavius Romeus, which is, what was the joke I heard? The most college football name in the UFC at the moment, maybe. Lee is 8-2. 0-2 in the UFC. Lost to Chris Gutierrez and Xiaolong. This is probably Bolaños. Yeah, he's a slight favorite. I don't know that he's the guy Lee is going to get his first UFC win off, given where I think their skills are. Heavyweights, God help us all. Thomas Peterson and Dontel Mays. Who could possibly care? Mays on a 2-fight losing streak. Got pissy about the heel hook loss to Walter Walker. You can't yell in pain, my man. That's a verbal submission. And Shamil Gaziev beat him before that. Peterson, 9-3, mixed UFC record, 1-2. The only losers here are the fans. Probably Mays for the sake of making a pick. And Peterson's actually a decent favorite. He's pretty durable, and Mays does fall apart a little bit down the stretch. Alright. Yeah, alright, fine. I'll trust the odds on that one. And at flyweight on the women's side of things, Juliana Miller and Ivana Petrovich. So, what do we got there? Miller 3-3. 1-2 in the UFC. Won a pointless season of Tough. Lost to Veronica Hardy. Lost to Luana Santos and has been out of action since August of 23. It's a long layoff. How old is she? Only 28. The layoff there makes it very difficult for me to... You can do a lot at that age. to try to like fix parts of your game. And look at Petrovic, 7-2, 1-2 in the UFC. Lost her debut to Luana Carolina, beat Leong Na, excuse me, and then split decision to Jamie Lynn Hort that I thought she won. Okay. The layoff for Miller is throwing a bit of a monkey wrench into how I feel about this. If she hasn't made some serious improvements, Petrovic would be my pick. Odds are with Petrovic. Again, I think the layoff is kind of playing there. I think it's going to play for me too. All right. Yeah, I'll go with Petrovic. No confidence in that one, though. So, there we go. Man, if I'm going to go negative on one of these, I haven't gone negative yet this year, knock on wood. But some of these cards are the ones where I go, it's probably coming. Saturday coverage, MMA Zone at 411mania.com. Y'all know the drill. Stop by, say hello. I always appreciate it. Close all that stuff up. All right, let's get to the news, shall we? So, the big news, the UFC announced their main event for UFC 318. They're in Louisiana for this one. It is Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway for the third time for the BMF belt. I'm not going to complain about this. We got another bit of some of the poetry that MMA provides. I went on a bit of a tangent about this with the weird triangle that Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall, and Anderson Silva formed. I think I did this after Weidman broke his leg fighting Hall. It was either that or when Hall beat Silva. I forget which of those came first. But one of those two, there's some weird rhythmic poetry going on there. Little bit of that going on here. Dustin Poirier was Max Holloway's first fight in the UFC, and now Holloway will be Poirier's last. Poirier did mention that this wasn't his first choice of opponent. His first choices were the third fight with Justin Gaethje or a fight with Ilia Topuria. Gaethje's stated reason for not wanting that fight was not wanting to put either of their families through that again, because both those times those two guys fought, they just took giant lumps out of each other. I get Poirier wanting that one to be the finish. They're 1-1, so ending his career, closing that trilogy would make sense. I also get why, no. Ilia Topuria is only fighting. It says he only wants to fight for a belt. And due respect to Dustin Poirier, former interim champion, former 3-time title challenger, legitimate legend. He doesn't have one, so. And frankly, I think I would favor Topuria pretty heavily. Max and Poirier, again, they fought twice, and Poirier's 2-0 against Max. I do tend to favor Poirier a little bit. His blocking seems to disrupt a lot of Max's offense, and he's got good thumping power coming back. Max having changed his body to be more of a legitimate a legitimate lightweight, might change some of the equation here just a tad. So, look, both of their two previous fights are really good. Looking forward to that one. No issues. Good fight. As a minor note, let me talk about this, I guess. Israel Adesanya talked a little bit about what he wants next in the wake of the loss to Nasruddin Imavov. He wants a rematch with Sean Strickland. And you know what? That is not the worst idea in the world, career-wise, for both guys. He had something about how Strickland fought kind of messed with Izzy that fight. He wants to try and get that one back. If Izzy's not ready to retire just yet, I think that's an acceptable fight for both guys. They're both out of the title picture. Strickland just lost cleanly the second time he fought Duplessis. I would be I'd be okay with that fight being made. Um, so anyway, that kind of was thrown on the table there by Adesanya. Don't know what might come of that. Speaking of Dricus du Plessis and the middleweight title picture, he came out with some public statement after the discussion about him being injured. Kind of denied it and said he still is willing to fight Chimaev. Responded to, when Chimaev did the, oh, this is BS thing, and he just said, look, let's take a look at each of our, we've each done over the last, 4 years, shall we? Because, Chimaev spent all that time out, which is a fair comeback. Here's my sense of things. Du Plessis picked up some kind of an issue. Probably a minor injury. Nothing. My hunch, again, if this was a major injury, surgery, and real recovery, I think he just would have said that. He probably picked up something relatively minor that just prevented the International Fight Week date from being reasonable for him. And when news of him being injured got floated, he just wanted to make clear, no, I'm not going to be out for a long time. It's more an issue of timing than an issue of, how's my fighting health over the next, 8 months. Minor stuff like this happens all the time to fighters, and when you get to a certain level, somebody tried to get a little bit salty at him. He's pulled out of several fights when he gets injured. Good. He's allowed to manage his career like that. If he doesn't want to fight when he doesn't feel like he's in a position to have a good chance of victory, then don't. A lot of fighters do, and to their detriment. It's a balancing act. You got to kind of balance, okay, I need to get paid, and I don't want to get the UFC too mad at me, but I don't need to go in injured, ruin my chances of winning, and damage myself, my career, and my trajectory inadvisably. So, balancing act. And du Plessis tends to err on the side of caution around the risks he's willing to take as far as his physical condition coming into a fight. I don't begrudge him that. It's not like he doesn't fight. He's not an inactive guy. He just isn't always on the UFC's schedule. And you know what? That's fine. He is not beholden to the UFC for any of that crap. So, if he manages himself that way, fair play to him. Once again, not a deeply inactive guy. He's going to square off with Khamzat Chimaev. The dude missed half a decade almost. Let's leave DDP alone about this. Okay? He fights regularly enough, and his fights don't suck. I'm not saying they're all the best things you've ever seen, but they don't suck, and I'll take that these days. So I'll cut the guy some slack on that. If he picked up something that makes him go, okay, I can't do it in June. How's end of July / beginning of August? What's unreasonable about that? Nothing's unreasonable about that, but well, here we are. All right. I think that's all I had for news. Let me take a quick scroll through the old social medias. I don't think there's anything here that's going to pop. Yeah, my feed has too much pro wrestling on it. Partially that's also, I just covered TNA event and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything fight related here. Okay. I'm sure they'll drop something tomorrow that will make me feel very foolish for, doing what I do, but, I can't predict. I can't predict the future. Not really a thing I can do, so. All right, let's get into plugs. So I just mentioned it, but earlier today, actually, I covered TNA Rebellion. It was an okay show. Covered WWE SmackDown on Friday. That was actually a very good show for weekly televised wrestling events. And I covered the UFC event on Saturday. Yeah, IMG and Prochess. I might just call him Image. It would amuse me to. I shouldn't. I shouldn't. But it would amuse me. This week, Monday, later than usual on Damn You Hollywood, they were kind enough, Mark was kind enough to accommodate some of my having to go later in the day. We will be reviewing from Netflix The Electric State. So tune in for that over on Damn You Hollywood on the W2M network. Regular coverage after that. So SmackDown on Friday, UFC event on Saturday. Back here to review UFC on ESPN 67. And we will preview UFC 315. They're back in Montreal. They haven't been there in a long time. Jeez. The last time they were in Montreal was UFC 186 in 2015. That was Demetrius Johnson and Kyoji Horiguchi in your main event. Last second finish for old DJ. How is that card looking, by the way? I mean, I can meme about the top two fights. Okay, you're going to pay through the nose for Events City, and you're going to get your unpopular champion title fight and another title fight that's a women's title fight. And again, I can joke about that, and I will joke about that as a general rule, but Bilal Muhammad and Jack Della Maddalena is not a bad fight. Shevchenko and Fior is kind of what just has to happen. Jose Aldo and Eamon Zahabi is not terrible. I don't care about Alexa Grasso and Natalia Silva. Benoit Saint-Denis and Joel Alvarez is violence, though. That one you can hook directly into my veins. That'll be good. So that's a solid pay-per-view. All things considered, I don't actually. Aldo and Zahabi might be good. I don't hold out a ton of hope for the two title fights to be like barn burners, but I'm not dismissing them either. I'm once again far from the biggest fan of Bilal Muhammad's fighting style, but I also don't think it's. I think it gets a little unfairly maligned. I understand why it is, but it also. A lot of Muhammad's earlier stuff cast a shadow across some of his later work that he's not been able to escape. Anything on the prelims worth talking about? Oh, geez, no. Nope, 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 nope. Yeah, that's a lot of nope. That is a solid, on paper, pay-per-view main card. Solid, not great. And prelims that are almost entirely skippable. What in there might not be? Bruno Silva's shot. Kevin Tucker and Jung Young Lee, maybe? Jessica Andrade and Jasmine, no. Yeah, it's a lot of no. You could not watch the prelims and probably miss nothing. I'll be covering them because that's what I do, and we'll do a full preview next week, but that is main card only. The rest of it, not nearly as much. Okay. Yeah, tune in next week. We'll go into detail. All right, that's it for me for this week. Thank you all very, very much for listening. I appreciate the heck out of you. Till next time, stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.